And we're back. Hi, everyone. For anyone who wasn't here earlier, I'm Tony Pantages. I know everything about the film business. And this session is called Marketing and Engagement in a Connected World. I'd like to acknowledge that Creative BC made this possible for us and makes a lot of things possible for the film industry. If you don't know a lot about Creative BC, I suggest you get in there and learn a bit more because they are your partners in making films out here. And I have three very important questions right now. Annelise, Larson, who are you and what do you do?
Well, I call myself a digital media and marketing mentor and strategist, which is quite a long title. I come from the indie film world originally, but I've been in the digital marketing space for 20 years this past summer. And for the past year and a half, 2 years, I've been teaching an online course called Becoming a Storypreneur. Still taking applications for a couple of weeks, basically teaching digital entrepreneurial skills to storytellers, usually screen storytellers. And at the end of the course, after 2 months, you should have all the bits and pieces to have a kick-ass digital marketing strategy. So that's what I do these days.
Fabulous. Emily Best, who are you? What do you do?
There's a reason they put us on a panel together, Annelise. My name's Emily Best. I'm the founder and CEO of Seed&Spark. We're the world's only film-specific crowdfunding platform with built-in distribution. So you can crowdfund on the platform, and then we make it possible for you to distribute theatrically to cable VOD and all the online retailers. That's Netflix, iTunes, Hulu, Amazon, Google Play, Voodoo, Sony, Xbox, just go the list.
Anything with an ooh on the end of it.
Ooh. Or anything missing a vowel. And I also spend a lot of time educating filmmakers on how to really find the power in creative entrepreneurship. I think the last panel, as Tony said earlier, probably meant to put the fear of God in you a little bit about how much the landscape has changed and the things that used to be true just aren't true anymore. And that's okay because you're all holding cell phones in your hands that can shoot, edit, and distribute movies. All of you are, right? So in that environment, we have to do things differently. And I believe that we have all the tools available to us to take charge. So that's what I hope we'll get around to today.
Thank you. Ryan Nadel, who are you? What do you do?
Thanks, Tony. I'm the co-founder and executive VP of a Vancouver-based company called 20 Year Media. My background is in media and technology, and 20 Year, the beginning of this past year, acquired a New York-based company called Emerging Pictures. And Emerging Pictures was one of the first companies to build a digital theatrical distribution network across the United States. And in our acquisition of Emerging Pictures, we act as both a sub-distributor for companies like Sony Classics, Magnolia, A24, the Weinsteins, and other kind of prominent independent distributors. And we use our technology to both distribute content very efficiently and effectively to our network of theaters, but then also on the consumer side, really understand what the demand is and where the demand is for different types of content, and use our delivery network to fill that demand. So we work with different types of groups. We've collaborated with Seed&Spark in trying to understand and analyze kind of this new landscape of distribution from the theatrical side, but then also its connections to all the digital components and social media components, and really aggregating all that demand.
I keep thinking that we're talking about films because that's just a traditional thing in our heads. But a few minutes ago, we were talking about something else too. How many people in here are involved in web series? Siobhan, put up your hand. Yeah. Tracy, put up your hand. Okay, how many people are involved in just features? How many people are doing things that we don't know the name of yet? New media. We call it new media. We have this word new media because we don't know what it means yet. Great, because I think an enriching experience for us is to realize that we're not just talking about films. We're talking about content that people want to see, that audiences want. The problem with that is, and we started earlier with this, we don't know how to get content to people anymore because things have changed so fast. And the marketing strategy for a film, for a web series, for new media, for any kind of content is crucial for its success. We know that. but it's often lost in this kind of new landscape of how things go. My own film's a good example, and I think it speaks to most independent features. You start off with a plan, and you have this line in your budget that says marketing, and some of us were really tricky, and we even put more money in because we knew that we needed to do extra stuff at the end, and we'd be smarter than the other guys. And then by the time you get to day 12 of production, your line producer tells you how much the crane cost. All that's gone, and you're wiped out. And by the time you've delivered your film, you look like death. You can barely be awake without coffee. And someone's saying, so what's your marketing strategy? So where do we go? What do we do? How do we go from that 0 miles per hour to on the highway and taking our film to an audience?
I think putting a frame around this a little bit at first is helpful. And the first thing I will say is, it's actually not hard to deliver your content to people anymore. That technology's made that really easy. It's really hard to let people know that it's there, louder than all the other people who are letting them know that it's there. I don't think it's true anymore. Well, it's just not true anymore, or it is true for the 0.001% that you make a film, it goes to a major festival, it gets picked up by a major distributor, and everything is like gravy for you. That happens. So I don't actually know the Canadian statistics, but in the US, about $4 billion a year is spent by independent filmmakers in production to make 15,000, and this is just feature films alone. So this isn't even counting the shorts, and that we estimate that market at about $5.5 billion. That's more than any major studio spends on making content. But we don't aggregate the audience, we don't aggregate the learning, and we don't aggregate the data. So we haven't been behaving like an organization that's getting smarter. We're just starting over from scratch every time. And independent filmmakers have largely been forced to do that because they haven't had control of their data on the distribution of their films for a really long time. Well, now that is a thing that we have to demand. Why? Because you're not building a film, you're building a film career, and that is a company. And you build the company one customer at a time, right? And so, like, sort of, I think the problem is we talk about, look, I'm in crowdfunding. Like, crowd, look at this crowd. There you are, and I only had to, like, do one thing, and here's the whole crowd. Audiences, that sounds like a really big number of people. Audiences and crowds are built one person at a time. And I think it's really important to understand that a long-term sustainable career in content making is built one person at a time, which means it takes time, it takes attention, and it takes effort in addition to what it takes to make the movie. The nice thing is all the stuff that Annelise teaches and that we teach are right in the wheelhouse of filmmakers, because it's all about telling your story in creative ways across multiple platforms where you can reach different kinds of people, right? And that's the one thing that you guys really know how to do, is tell stories. And sometimes you do it in 140 characters, and sometimes you do it in 95 minutes of, video content. But I think it's starting with the frame of saying, look, if what you want is an actually independent, sustainable career, you have to be in it for the long run. And you don't live with your film only through production and post. You're gonna live with that film for like 7 years. You guys, 7 years probably. Like, that's a long time. From development all the way through distribution until you're making your next movie. It also requires a certain energy level that I think filmmakers haven't been taught to expect. Because what do? We sprint through production, and then we get to post, and we're like, oh, fuck, post. And then we sprint through post, and we're like, oh, great, it's done. Oh, festivals. Oh, God. And then we go to festivals already. That's right. We go to, my favorite F word is festivals. But then we go to festivals, and we're exhausted, so we don't do the things at the festivals that would set us up for a really powerful marketing and distribution engine, right? And then we get to the end of the festival run, and we're like, somebody just take my movie. Just do whatever, And that's a bummer position to be in, because then you don't have the energy to actually sit down at the table, find out what the deals are, figure out what's good for you, and build a monetization plan that will actually do things like, I don't know, pay your investors back.
I would also say that in Canada, we have some extra challenges as well as opportunities, because we do have a government funding system, which is not available in the US.
Lucky you. Or maybe
well,
not.
yes and no, because I think it buffers us from market realities. Your customer then becomes the funders and not a real audience. And I've found the differences in teaching Americans versus any other country in the world pretty much that has government funding involved in the mix is that the Americans are closer to the entrepreneurial mindset. They're more likely to share their data. We absolutely here in this country, you have to fight tooth and nail to get anything out of anyone because they're worried if they share their data and it looks like a failure, they will never get government funding again. So it's a huge challenge and a conversation that I continue to have with the funders because they have less money. They are getting less and less money, and we'll know how much less on October 20th if the election goes one way or the other.
Vote for your career.
I'm a little bit political these days. But regardless, we have the benefit of this system, but it becomes in some ways a handicap. Our distributors are caught in this system as well. It buffers them. I was listening to the panel previous to this, and I was thinking, yeah, you had an example of, they are in a false economy too, because they're subsidized by the government. They don't really have to do the same kind of work. In fact, I've worked with filmmakers that have gone through a Canadian experience that was so shitty, and then all of a sudden got picked up by, and had an American partner who's actually an entrepreneur and needs to make their money back. Here in Canada, the distributors don't necessarily have to. If they decide your film or project is unmarketable, they still get their government money, but they don't have to invest it in marketing your movie. So
they can still charge you for it, though.
Oh, yeah.
So one thing that makes me think, and I'm sorry, is I think then it is, so Americans don't have a choice because the government gives a shit about the arts, and so we have to do it tooth and nail. You have a government support that creates, this is gonna be an unpopular term, and just forgive me, it creates a certain culture of dependence on what the funders want as opposed to what the audiences want, and it doesn't necessarily. It's certainly not independent, right? Yes. And if we're talking about, this is the power of the indie day, right? I think the question that is more important for you to ask yourselves, we don't get a choice. So the question more important for you to ask yourselves is, what do you want? What do you want for your career? And maybe going the path of government funding isn't gonna get you that thing. And maybe it is, right? But it's really about having an honest conversation about what is it that you uniquely want, and then figuring out what kind of relationship it's important for you to build with audiences, with investors, with government funders, with distributors that will get you that thing. And I think it's important not to just default to, well, I have to get into the government funding game. Right? That should be the second step. The first step is, what kind of career do I want to have? And is that a part of it or not? Yeah. I think. That's easy for me to say. I don't even get it as a choice.
Yeah, the positives and negatives of government funding, we could debate and discuss for a long time, and there's a lot on both sides of the ledger. But I just wanted to respond to something Emily said when she outlined kind of the arc of making your movie, doing post, going to the festivals, and now you have to come up with a monetization plan. You should really start with that monetization plan at the outset. And I don't mean, how am I going to sell this? We know the channels and platforms of monetization. But what I mean by that is, how are you going to prove to me, a distributor, that there's traction behind your film? And I want to emphasize that traction doesn't mean volume. Volume can be bought. I can buy 1 million Facebook followers, but what I can't buy is velocity. And what I mean by velocity is a level of engagement and intensity of a connection between your content and an audience. And it doesn't necessarily have to be your finished film or your finished trailer, but it can be the ideas, the concepts, the people involved in your film. And as long as you can show me that there's traction, then I'm going to pay attention to what you're doing. Absolutely, absolutely. And I get a lot of content coming at me all day long, and all of it wants to find a home in theatrical, and some of it is looking to make money on the theatrical side, and some of it is looking to use theatrical as a platform to promote across other channels, digital distribution later in the life cycle. But I've got to make money in theatrical. And I can tell you this, people still buy tickets to go to movies. How many people went to a movie in a movie theater in the last month? Right? Almost every single person in this room. And I would not say that there is selection bias in this room. I would say if you went into any room across Vancouver, any coffee shop, most people would raise their hands. People still go to movies. And you know, one of the analogies that I like to use is Starbucks, right? You can make a cup of coffee at home. You can make a cup of coffee cheaper at home. But you walk into a coffee shop and it's packed. And it's because maybe the coffee's better, maybe the coffee's not better. But there's an experience of going out of your house and having coffee around with other people. It has nothing to do with the coffee. It has nothing to do with the price. So if you want to keep attacking the the theatrical experience because you can watch movies at home, the argument is a false argument in a lot of ways. But that's maybe a topic for another panel.
Sorry, yeah, I was just going to say that I don't think anybody in this room would be actually making that argument. I think what we need to help people understand is that it's not easy to pack a theater, and you can't think I'm ready to take my movie out theatrically and then expect anyone to know how to pack that theater if you haven't done some audience research, marketing, and building in advance. Because there are a lot of theaters with a lot of movies in them, and you are, when you go out theatrically, competing with movies with $200 million marketing budgets, right? That's just a fact. When you want to put your movie out theatrically, like, that's what you're competing with. So you better have other tactics, right? Because you probably won't have, you're not going to raise $200 million in marketing unless you're Robert Zemeckis remaking a documentary that didn't need to be remade. That's just my opinion.
Yeah, and there's a lot of different ways to do that. I'll give you an example from our film. We knew we were up against a problem when our film was coming out theatrically because we didn't have a big marketing budget, and so we gambled in our own way. We went and found a couple of angels who bought 100 tickets each for theaters on the opening nights and then on the Sunday nights as well of our first weekend. So we all know in Canada the first weekend counts for everything. If the numbers don't make it, you're gone the next day. It's over. That's all you got was 3 or 4 days and it's over. So we peppered the first weekend in Vancouver, Toronto, Calgary, and Montreal. I co-directed the film with my partner, so we were able to bilocate and be in 2 cities on the same night. And we booked every show we possibly could because my partner Gil Bell's a little sexy on TV. He was in Shawshank Redemption, Ally McBeal, and a bunch. He's a Canadian player. So we were able to leverage, without really spending money, bringing a few angels in towards us, and that kick-started the movement outward, and we were held over for 3 weeks with zero marketing otherwise. We weren't putting anything else into it.
I would also say my approach is, and I think you've probably heard this theme already quite a few times, it's always audience first. And anything we make in Canada, we're not going to have 100 million. I mean, Telefilm's whole budget for marketing the films that it invests in is $10 million. So we are never, ever going to be a mass media country. We just aren't. We don't have the dollars in the system. So anything we do is going to be niche. So then you have to understand what are the niche audiences that you need to activate. I would suggest globally, forget this stupid country boundary nonsense. And maybe your audience is going to the theater. But there was a great report that Telefilm did, I think, for 2014 that looked at the audiovisual viewing habits of Canadian audiences. And we are going to the theaters less on the whole. We are going for the big blockbusters. We go for comedies. We go for the Hollywood films. We don't care in English-speaking Canada if a movie's Canadian. Couldn't care less. We don't care. So it becomes about the content, the story, and who you are going to be able to activate with that, and preferably not just one film, but across your body of work, so that you don't have to rebuild the frickin' audience every single time, because it's a lot of work.
Take them with you.
As much as you can. Like one of the students in my last class was working with a director that had a very strong LG, well, all of the letters that go with that. These days I'm losing track.
LG A through Z.
Oh my God. I think someone has started to call it quilt bag because it includes most of the letters that are in it. Anyway. So when we were looking at his second film, and he had also had this short that had been pirated like crazy on YouTube and had just gone nuts. It had been this really cute little viral success. So how do we leverage all those pieces in a plan for this new movie that doesn't really have the same kind of themes necessarily, but we found a character. There was a young trans character who was a friend of the main character that had a teensy-tiny role. So it actually affected the enlargement of that role in terms of the narrative, because then they could bring that quilt bag audience from the short and the first feature with them through to this new feature that isn't necessarily, you know, a film of that particular genre, but it's going to have enough things in it that that audience that was built previously is still going to say, oh yeah, this like, because they also don't care who the filmmaker is. They care about characters, they care about story worlds. You know, a weird kind of indie franchise model is sort of how you have to think of your business.
Can we talk some nuts and bolts really quickly? Because I feel like, so here's what you know. You have to go out and find that audience, right? You're going to build them one at a time. How do you do that? There are a lot of people here. Ivan Asquith is in the audience. There are a lot of people at the festival who have incredible experience and depth in all of the various interesting and creative ways. And the cool thing is your audience building tactics are going to be as unique as the stories that you're telling. They're going to have to be. And that is a way to start to make it fun and interesting, because you're going to engage audiences around the actual kinds of stories that you're making, respecting the creative material. And I think it's really important to, I have to say this because I hear it so often. So I'm not accusing you of anything, but I'm saying I hear a lot from filmmakers, well, I don't want to pander to the audience. And I hate when they say this, because pandering means you think your audience is stupid. And it's weird to think your audience is stupid, because those are the people that you think are watching your movies, which means your movies are stupid. So you have to at least presume that your audiences are as smart as you think you are. And why that's important is then you can start to understand them as potential collaborators as opposed to consumers. And why that's important, I think, is that it increases the sort of like total empathic space in which you are creating. Does that make sense? That's like a weird sort of way to phrase it, but in my head, it's like the circle in which the creative inspiration can happen is much larger. That's the visual that I have in my head. And why, to that point, it is about understanding that your Facebook, Twitter, Tumblr, Reddit, crowdfunding page, all of those things are storytelling tools, right? They're not means unto themselves. Like if you're just using crowdfunding to raise money, you are missing the point. If you are just using Twitter to get followers, you are missing the point. Again, it goes back to what do I want to do? I want people to watch my movies, web series, VR experience, thing that we haven't identified yet. I want them to interact with my immersive theatrical experience, whatever. That is the goal. So everything else, the Twitter, your Twitter and your Facebook and your crowdfunding, is to guide people from the ether where they've never heard of you into the center where they're doing the thing that you want them to do, right? And that takes specific steps that are sort of specific to each platform and specific to each story. Does that make sense? And this is a thing that you have to learn to do. And filmmakers are like, screw you, I already have to learn to shoot in every camera and learn every workflow, and then Final Cut will go to FCPX and then I don't know anything anymore, or Adobe does an update and I have to start all over, or I have to learn to work with new actors, or yes, you have to know how to do so many things well. But if you focus on the part of marketing that is storytelling, and specific storytelling to specific people, I think you will find it is in your wheelhouse, and it might even be kind of enjoyable.
Well, I think what you're saying is definitely true, and to expand on it even more, this idea of empathy is the heart of storytelling, but it's also the heart of business negotiation. If you can't understand what the person across the table is thinking and feeling, you're never going to get a deal done. It's also the heart of marketing. So really, it's the same activity, just packaged in different ways. When I call a theater and say, hey, I've got this great movie, it's got traction, it's got an audience, you got to trust me, here's the trailer. I've got to empathize with that theater, as Emily said, because they're choosing not to screen something else to show your movie. So it's, the heart of it is really the same. And we've all grown up in kind of this bifurcated college mentality where you major in marketing, you major in filmmaking, you major in business, and the things aren't interconnected, which is so false. If you can't hustle as a filmmaker across all spectrums, it's not going to go anywhere, right? Even if you're in the studio system. Those guys hustle the hardest, right? Those actors, Seth Rogen has learned how to work the media, work contracts, and be a damn good actor, right? So to just think you can be an auteur.
Medic, please. Emily's got us having Sethitis right now.
It's fine.
Did you see him performing at bar mitzvahs when he was 13?
His
he was
Richard
good.
His
He
Richard
was
III
good.
of the Berkowitz bar mitzvah was
That I've been
amazing.
to.
And his Wozniak is pretty good.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
But the Woz himself is so good.
That's
All right,
true.
no, I'll
That's
see
true.
jobs. I'll see jobs and reserve judgment.
Okay.
Okay, so what I'm hearing in a way is it's not just about curating your film's marketing approach, it's curating your communication outward, even just as a creator, towards your friends and family and eventually your audience. It's not
So,
just about the
Annelise,
project.
actually, I want to say this in front of you, and then I will take it if you correct me. But if you start to use Twitter and Facebook as business tools, which I think as storytellers you absolutely should, it actually means you can't just use it the way other people casually use it. You can't use it to talk about how bummed out you are today, or what you ate for breakfast, or the quality of the coffee in the coffee shop. It becomes a much more curated feed. Because actually what you're trying to do is find the sweet spot that is the intersection of who you are and who you're trying to reach, and not the part of who you are that is not trying to reach those folks. Now, that means with different films, you might be sort of exploring different parts of who you are, because that's how films work, right? They're different parts of your own interests and things like that. It also means you have to go back and look at your social media handles to see what's working and what's not. So you might find that when you post something really sad about your morning coffee, it gets like 2 comments. But when you post something, if you're like, but when you post something that's like really excited about this new thing that's inspiring you, and it starts a conversation on your Facebook page, that's really important information. Do less of the former and more of the latter. Does that make sense? Like, it's about engaging with, look, is anybody else afraid that social media might just like suck out your very soul? Yeah, okay. So the cool thing is, when you start to approach it as a business tool, it becomes way less scary because you're controlling it. You're deciding what the parameters are. You're deciding what you're using it for, as opposed to sort of like it dominating you. And I think that's really important, especially for women, honestly, because social media can actually be a very dangerous place particularly if you're making films about, subject matter that's related to feminism or reproductive rights, or God forbid you just have an opinion about reproductive rights on Twitter. It can be very dangerous. So I think it's really important also to understand that, like, it's about taking this mindset and applying it to everywhere, that all your communication channels kind of forever. And if you want to protect one, if you want to say, like, my personal Facebook is my personal Facebook, that's how I do it. My personal Facebook is just covered in videos of cute baby animals. That's it. Like, that's pretty, and like kids, like young kids doing impressive things that I am going to adopt someday. That's it, right? But that's for me and my friends, and I have sort of control over that. Like, my Twitter is very much a professional face. And I've been able to make those choices. It also makes it easier for me to understand how to use Twitter or something like that, because there's so many platforms. But if you're using them to reach targeted channels and you're using them for targeted purposes, it becomes easier to learn how to use them in the first place in effective ways, because you have goals.
Yeah.
How did I do?
Yeah, I think that you're using it with intention,
Yes.
right? Absolutely. You have to be using it with intention. You're absolutely right that there is this bigger footprint that you're creating by everything you touch online. And that shouldn't terrify you, which it may, because, the next thing will come along and that will fade down into the Twitterverse or wherever you are. But at least for yourself, you have to be participating in this online world with intention. You have to be understanding what is it that you're trying to accomplish. What are your goals? Maybe maybe it's not to make money. Maybe it's that you want to land you're a very passionate about ocean health and you want to make a documentary about the oceans that's going to change the world and affect change. Maybe it's that you want to be picked up by a big brand like Red Bull to do all of their crazy, go to Panama and do crazy videos for them. It all depends what your end goal is, but it's much bigger than your next movie. It's much bigger than your next tweet. It is an ongoing story. It's the story of your intention online and where you want to get and who you want to reach. Once you understand what you're trying to accomplish, then you will know who you want to reach. It doesn't mean that you have to do everything, because you just have to be where the people you want to reach is. So that's really important. The intention is important.
And just expanding on that, beyond intention, this is the kind of nerd data side of me speaking. You've got testing platforms, right? So when you post something and you see that, half a dozen of your friends respond to a post which is focused on kind of element X, and then you post something else and hundreds of people respond to it, that's feedback for you. And as a creator, you should go, oh, what's the difference between post A and post B, and start to refine your communication strategies, maybe even the story that you're crafting, how you're telling it. It's the tools are amazing that we have just to be able to start to refine and test our own messaging, and you should be doing that with every tweet and every Facebook post. And if it doesn't get the reaction you like, take it down, right? You can take things down. Obviously, stuff is captured in one way or another, but start to think of every post that you're making as this way of learning more about your audience and how to connect with them.
Yeah. So my first feature film, which is the sort of experience that gave rise to founding Seed&Spark in the first place, crowdfunding was relatively new, and we weren't comfortable asking for a pile of money. We really wanted people to understand what it would take to make this film. So we made a wedding registry, which you guys are familiar with, right? We listed the individual items we needed, right? The camera and the car rentals and the bug spray and the sunscreen, because we were shooting in Maine in the summer, and if you don't have bug spray and sunscreen, you're really in a bad place.
20,000 for bug spray.
Exactly. It was mostly for bug spray. Everything else was cheap. We also, we asked for things that would go on camera that sort of gave people, sort of tipped the hat a little bit about what kind of scenes we might be shooting. Also things from behind the scenes that taught the audience about what we were making. So also, gaff tape and certain kinds of lights, and we would put little explanations in so people could understand what they were doing. And this really interesting thing happened. We needed $20,000 in cash. We raised $23,000 in cash, but hundreds of thousands of dollars in loans and gifts of locations and goods and services. But the locations that we were offered were so spectacular, we rewrote the film to incorporate them, and they made us look way more expensive. This is where treating your audience as potential collaborators can be very lucrative for you, right? Because now we have a film that looks like it was made for a lot more than it was made for, because our audience said, hey, I think I have a place that might make this story better, and they were right. And so this is where data, and I know it sort of makes everybody kind of go, ugh, reading graphs about how well you're performing across different social media platforms can actually help you understand which story elements are most effective. And that's not a terrible thing. That's not a less good way than just getting notes on your script. It's actually sort of a more effective way of getting notes on your script.
More honest, for sure.
Yeah, it's certainly more honest. And so when we made the film, we had, I don't know, it's like any crowdfunded film, the credits go on for 4 hours. We had to find 2 songs. And those people packed the theaters that we screened in, right? And brought all their friends. And when we took the film to film festivals like Oaxaca and a town in Poland, I can't even remember its name, where we had never been before. Somebody who contributed to that campaign or somebody who knew somebody showed up and brought their friends. Crowdfunding is about distribution, guys. That's what it's for. And it's because you've identified the crowd, you've activated the crowd, and now you've incentivized the crowd because they feel like participants. So that part of it is really important too. To Ryan's point earlier, you're thinking about your monetization strategies almost before you're starting any of the process, because of course, in the end, it's about what am I trying to do? And if the answer is I'm trying to make a sustainable living as a filmmaker, or I'm trying to pay back my investors, which I hope you all try to do in earnest, then you have to be thinking about this stuff up front, obviously, because that's going to be one of the ways you would convince investors to get involved with you in the first place.
And I would add, I'll tell you guys a secret. Crowdfunding really means pre-sales. But the difference is in the way that Seed&Spark frames crowdfunding and the way that Kickstarter frames it and Indiegogo is they make the audience feel like they're part of the process. And that's the big difference between pre-sales and crowdfunding. And feeling like you're part of the process the result is engagement, sharing, virality, all these things.
Yeah, I would say it's about the emotional investment more than the financial investment.
Absolutely.
Because everyone's on board. It's their movie now they're going to see getting made.
Yes, and I actually would like us to stop saying that crowdfunding is pre-sales, because for products, it totally is. And while, yes, you are probably pre-selling a stream or download of your film, what you're actually doing is relationship and fan building. And that is relationship, because if you treat it as here's the problem. If you treat it as a pre-sale, once you deliver the pre-sold item to the people, that's the end of that transaction. That is not so with crowdfunding. If you treat that as a transactional relationship, you lose that long-term career value. That is not a pre-sale. That is somebody who has identified themselves as a potential lifelong fan, and you must treat them that way. So not only do you deliver the film, you take them all the way through the process, and you take them into the process of your next film, because they might be around forever. They might be part of your 1 or 10,000 or 50,000 true fans who follow you from film to film and help you build the sustainable career. So yes, it's true. It is technically a pre-sale, but please don't treat your crowdfunding backers in a transactional way, because you will lose the long-term benefit of them.
100%. And what I meant by pre-sale is it is data which indicates
That's
that
right.
people will pay money to see what you are making. But the reason it's way more effective is because it's more about the relationship than it is about the dollars.
That's right.
It's actually why I love micro patronage. So a platform like Patreon, where you have someone who says, okay, yeah, I love this creator. I want to invest in their creative life. Take $3, $5 off my credit card every month forever. And I will continue to invest in them. I have a friend who has, I talked a bit about this last Tuesday in one of my case studies, who has basically this space news and content empire online. He's got 500 micro patrons who give him $2,000 collectively every month to create and support his guide to space that he builds.
Did everyone's light just turn on really bright? Is everyone writing that part down? I gotta go.
Yeah.
I think, I've heard some people say, I don't want that many bosses. Like, I don't want people, that have that much to say about my work. But in the new paradigm,
Then
don't want an audience.
Don't be a
business.
filmmaker.
Exactly.
Yeah,
In what
I know.
universe?
I know. Well, it's that auteur, I am the creator and I should have, but it's not the new
And
world.
they should be a poet.
Yeah, exactly. It's way cheaper.
Let me
Do you know
give
what's like a bummer is that we've had to create this sort of dichotomy between auteur and creative entrepreneur, and I think that is like a fundamentally false split. That what we are talking about is being able to build a life that allows you your ultimate creative freedom. And that is because you value the people who are willing to spend money on the things that you make enough to say that they matter. That does not make you an auteur. When did auteurism become about not giving any shits what people think about your work?
The damn French.
Okay, I don't know what it is in Canada to blame the French for stuff. Was that like a really political thing that she just did? I don't know. That seemed really
everyone
dangerous.
has to leave the building immediately.
But I think actually what we're talking about is a new landscape for auteurism. That is not ignoring the fact that the cell phone that you have in your pocket has fundamentally changed everything forever. Like, in what universe can we have that kind of computing power in our pockets and still pretend like this 120-year-old system is going to work for us? It's just absurd. So, I encourage you to start this discussion with all of your friends and, let's talk about this, maybe on Twitter, for example. I really want to know, can we shift this idea about auteurism to creative entrepreneurship in a way that, those of us who are kind of happy to do marketing don't get sort of poo-pooed by the true creators. I actually think like, Ivan has run the 3 largest content crowdfunding campaigns in history: Veronica Mars, Reading Rainbow, and Super Troopers. And each of those creative marketing campaigns were so incredibly fun and creative and engaging for their audiences. They were art pieces unto themselves, right? Why isn't he as like auteurish as, I don't know, Truffaut was in his time? It's as interesting to leverage. You're welcome. It's as interesting to think about somebody leveraging the technology that exists now to do mind-blowing new storytelling, right? Isn't that what that is?
Yeah, and you guys do know that the 400 Blows was completely crowdfunded, right? It worked like that. But it's a really valid point. We're not just talking about marketing, we're also talking about challenging a traditional system that hasn't woken up yet to the fact that people have moved on, and that we are stuck trying to fill out forms like it's the 1980s for theatrical distribution and platforms that our projects might not even have wanted to have a life in. Not every film is supposed to go to the same place. You have to know who you are before you make your film, and like you say, you have to engage at that point. You can't just make it and then say, how are we gonna sell it? So yeah, this is all very, very good news.
You can, but that's like buying a lottery ticket. Yeah. It's the equivalent of buying a lottery ticket. So if you've ever, look, I'm guilty of it, if you've ever written a business plan that says, you know, in the high scenario, we go to Sundance and get picked up by Sony Pictures Classic,
it's a shoo-in.
that's right. And that your comps are, you know, Little Miss Sunshine, and those are lottery winners. That's literally saying, I am going to win the lottery. So yes, you can play the lottery, and I think you see those people when you go to buy lottery tickets that are like really banking that that's gonna be the answer. And that's like a sad door to beat on that will never open for you.
Well, it was interesting watching. There was a couple of stories that came out of the latest round of TIFF, what sold there, and in terms of Canadian movies, and it was international co-productions, so that their budgets could get so much bigger, so they could attract the stars. I would not say that that's. I mean, I think the system is broken everywhere, whether it's a Hollywood blockbuster or American indie or Canadian or European movie. I think the problem is that the people that are picking up movies at TIFF only know how to sell a big movie with a big star. They don't know how to do what we're talking about today. So there's a huge opportunity here for people who can crack their brains open and roll up their sleeves and get to work today.
Well, it's more that they don't know how to do it. It's they're very scared to do it because they will lose their jobs.
Change is hard. Change is hard.
Hey, at this point, let's open it up a bit and see what's going on in your heads. Does anyone have a question? Yes. Wait for the microphone.
Hi, so I just have a question in terms of strategy and timing. So you're building this audience, you've got this audience following you, following your brand, and you have a film you're working on that's coming out. But as we know, you can sit in development for 2 or 3 years sometimes until you actually get into production. So you don't want to, I guess the concern is, what if you come out too early, you're talking about this film, and people are like, oh my God, they're talking about this film that's never going to happen again. What kind of timing strategically would be a good idea?
Well, I think there's a challenge with non-episodic content in this way. I think one-off features have a real challenge. I think if you can create some kind of episodic content, it's much easier to leverage the digital opportunity. But so when you have just a single story that you're telling, you need to find all kinds of ways, I think, to supplement that story so that you can bring, whether it's behind the scenes stuff or whatever bits and pieces you want to do. Maybe it's a blog written by one of the minor characters that gives sort of a Rosencrantz and Guildenstern dead perspective on Hamlet. You know, like you can do, again, really leveraging your storytelling chops in completely new and exciting ways can create more story that you can exploit for a longer period of time. And so the longer you can do that, I think that's how you stretch it out. So it's not just all about, come see my movie. No, you're wanting to bring people into the world and have a dialogue with them.
And it obviously really depends on whether you're talking about a dramatic feature or a documentary. Obviously, you know, I love documentaries from a business perspective. I think you guys have found great success with them as well. There's got to be a hook for a documentary, right? So it's about engaging in that subject matter and demonstrating that you are an expert in it, right? Like, and that people should be listening to you, and the documentary is just the result of expertise and experience, as it relates to the subject matter.
Yeah, docs are always about something, so I find it a much clearer line than looking at a fictional narrative, because you can say, oh, this one's about whales, so we need to engage the whale-loving community and participate in it. And I think not just set yourself as an expert and say, I know all these great things, but actually say, hey, what do you know? How can you inform this story? What can you teach me about your passion about whales?
So obviously your social media platforms, even if you're using them for business, can't just be trumpets for your own self-promotion. That would get really boring. They have to be places that people are going. You have to become a resource around the things that are interesting to you. The nice thing is you're probably already gathering all of that information. What's happening during development? You're doing research, you're doing script readings, you're talking to actors, you are getting deeper into the story, you're developing backstories. If you're narrative and doc, you're probably shooting the whole time. So there are lots of things and then somebody's writing an article about the real world context of the film that you're making. Or so there's a film that crowdfunded on Seed&Spark called Seclusion, and it was a short film that is being developed into a feature, and out of the success actually of the short film, it got picked up for the Sundance Labs, right, for the Screenwriter Labs, and it's being developed into a feature. So now she has this crowdfunding page with all these people who are super interested in the short version. Now she's messaging to them and keeping them engaged for the long term. All she posts is really cool news about outer space, because that's what the film is about. So she's become a resource for interesting information about outer space. So I found out about saltwater on Mars from a campaign update that I got from her. It came to me before I got onto Facebook, and that was all that was in my feed, because my friends are apparently obsessed with outer space. But these are ways in which the long game can actually benefit you, because it keeps you also kind of active in the subject matter that you're working on. And so, look, the only way that audiences will get involved with you is if they understand why it's important to be involved with you. And you have to articulate your big, hairy, audacious why for your own career, but also for each individual project, so that you understand why anybody would follow you in the first place. And for longer term development cycles, you have to give them a reason, right? And that's hard to say unless we know a little bit more about the project, but it might be that, oh, there's this community that's really interested in talking about, I don't know, right to die issues. I just recently started developing a web series about sort of right to die issues, but it's a comedy web series, but I know that that's a community that I want to engage because I'm interested in those themes, right? So I can spend a lot of time in and around that, even though I'm developing a comedy web series that's not going to shoot for a while, right? So I think there's a lot of opportunities, and articulating the why, both why am I making this and why should anybody want to follow it, will help you kind of extend the life of this connection. Also considering you're probably not only working on one thing, right? If you're in development for 2 years, you're working on one thing and you're working on a couple of other things. So you can actually seed a lot of conversations simultaneously, which I think is also helpful, so that you don't feel stuck in the rut of a 2-year development cycle, which is super frustrating. I'm sorry to hear that.
We have another question up here. Yes,
Hi, thanks. I'm on a team that's putting an application into the Tell Us Story Hive short film thing, and then the promotional marketing plan, there's an FAQ that says, beyond the story, do you have a secret marketing weapon or social media stunt to engage audiences? And I realize it's one by one that you build your audience, but do you have any comments on social media stunts or examples or comments on that?
Go ahead.
Sure. I worked on a TV show, which I'm sure a lot of you heard of, called Continuum, Vancouver-based show. So I did the entire digital media campaign for that. So leading up for the first season. So
First season was awesome.
Building the brand, basically educating the audience about this time travel world. And one of the many things that we did, in addition to writing a comic book and obviously building a website, is we did quite an extensive alternative reality game. And we did a lot of live drops across the country. And I don't know if you would categorize this as a stunt, but we created the the world in such a fashion that one of our players got a tattoo of Liberate, which was one of the characters in the show. At the 3rd episode, he got the tattoo before the season was even done, or he knew how it was going to play out. And it was, that was an amazing result for kind of the stunts we had planned, which was making this thing feel real and bringing it into the real world. And I think, the idea of a social media stunt really speaks to this notion of velocity versus volume, is these types of things aren't going to have huge appeal. They're not going to be mass market types of activities, but they'll be very, very intense ones. And what intensity does, it has ripple effects, right? So people start talking about it and listening to it and paying attention to it in different ways. So I would say definitely, but the stunt has to be appropriate for the world that you're creating. It worked for Continuum. It was a science fiction time travel show. So that type of stuff worked. If it was a comedy about, Right to Die, it wouldn't work in the same way to do a stunt, right?
So I have a cheaper example about, like, meaning sort of time commitment and dollar commitment, also about a time travel short film called Time Signature. And as part of their crowdfunding campaign, he would write to the backer and say, thank you so much. If you could go anywhere in time, where would you go? And then find a photo of the person on the internet and Photoshop them into wherever they said they wanted to go. And they were brilliant Photoshops. I mean, just amazing. But this is just like a skill he has that costs him no money. So I stupidly said I wanted to go to the signing of the Magna Carta. And I'm not kidding, in 20 minutes he was tweeting. We found at Emily Best at the signing of the Magna Carta.
Like,
that was
really
my real
brave?
answer. I'm really embarrassed about my answer, you guys. I don't want to talk about it. But he found a photo of me and made it and photoshopped it into like an old scroll painting of the signing of the Magna Carta. I looked like a 13th century friar in this, and like he did an amazing job. And I was so tickled by it. I shared it everywhere. I made it my Facebook background picture because I gave him a stupid answer and he made an amazing thing out of it. But here's the other thing that it did. I know that my share of that was worth 7 other contributions to his crowdfunding campaign for the same reward. And then he would post them on Facebook, on Twitter. So he tagged me on Twitter. I retweeted it, so that amplified his message with the hashtag time signature, which was how he was organizing across all the platforms. And then he was creating a gallery on his Facebook page as new ones came in. So we all kept going back and visiting his Facebook page because we were obsessed with, is there a new one? And that demonstrated to us the momentum, the velocity that was happening behind the campaign. It cost him no money. It did cost him time. He did this only, I think, for the first week of his campaign because he was aware how much Photoshopping he was really willing to do. But that was a really wonderful convention. Now, I've seen similar things like this replicated badly, and then it becomes sort of like sad and terrible. So you want to pick something that's really like
I've got
specific.
those types of stories too.
Yeah. But I do think that there are inexpensive stunts related to skills you already have that appeal to people and turn every new follower or funder into an amplifier, because that's what the goal of a stunt is.
Well, and I think as well that you can tap into the other conversations created by, like, if you know the space and you understand the language being used by your audience and the hashtags that are being used, you can often, like that, and it costs nothing. You don't have to Photoshop anything. Maybe it's International Women's Day and you find a way to, you know it's coming up and you build it into your strategy and you find a way to have a presence in that conversation. Someone recently who was very, very new to Twitter, we did this big campaign around Women Vote to try and get, be part of the conversation around our current federal election, to try and get women's issues in it. But we had this amazing day a week and a half ago, conversation that went right across the country. And this older person who had never really been on Twitter before, she said, now I understand hashtags. They're like a room that you can step into and all of a sudden be part of this conversation and have, because we tweeted on not just Women Vote, but we also did on these political hashtags that we knew were going to be really active. So we had all kinds of reach and pickup, and we got some of the nasty stuff.
Yeah, of course.
So because that was one of our success measures,
Yeah.
if we weren't loud enough to piss off the trolls,
Yeah.
then we weren't doing our job.
Trolls only guard bridges that need crossing.
That's right. Yeah, and apparently the way to get more women to vote is putting stoves in the polling booths, I learned. So,
Oh,
yeah.
good one. You just taught me how to explain hashtags to my parents. Thank you.
I know. Isn't
It's
that
a room. Genius.
We have a. We
I
have
just
another
wanted
question.
to sorry,
Go
just
ahead.
wanted to add one thing. I don't like the phrase stunt when it comes to this type of stuff because stunt implies gimmick or one-off or
Yeah.
flash in the pan. If it's not a meaningfully aligned experience, authentic, it's a waste of time.
Yeah.
So any social media stunts don't characterize them like that. They have to be meaningful and aligned with your message and authentic for them to work.
Think of it as walking into a restaurant. Someone gives you that little taste of something for free. You didn't order it. They just give you something, and all of a sudden you're like, I like this place, and you're in. So yeah, think of it as something that's enticing your audience and something that's inviting them at the same time. And we have a question. Oh, I'm sorry, over here. Yes.
Hi, I have a practical question, and I'm wondering if you have a recommendation of a platform to keep track of your followers. And the reason why I'm asking this is I produce a feature documentary called Philharmonic, and we have about 5,000 donors in Kickstarter and 250,000 likes in Facebook. And so our teaser became viral back in 2012, and we finally finished the film, and it's here in Vancouver. So now we're putting together all these different platforms, and I'm a film producer, and this whole media building, it's fascinating to me and my little tiny team. So we're trying to keep track of how do we put together all these followers in a trackable way before the movie is released. And we're talking about a commercial release of March next year, March. So if you can recommend a platform of how to keep track of followers and audiences, because the film is being screened in festivals, so we have all these venues, and I mean, sitting there with people entering databases in Excel, and we're like wondering if there is another smarter way to do this. So I know it's too practical.
Are you talking about like email addresses or followers across the board?
Followers, like we get non-stop messages via Facebook, for example.
So you want to
and we
aggregate
get-
your messaging and
tweeters and all these people, and we were like, oh my God, we have to take advantage of this, right? But how do we keep track of all these audiences? And I know we're in a lucky place, but we're again a tiny small team trying to maximize this opportunity.
So I think there's two issues there, which are both important. One is kind of the project management side of it. How do you keep up with it? How do you track it? How do you respond in a efficient, kind of timely manner across multiple platforms? So not to plug another Vancouver company, but Hootsuite does fulfill a lot of those needs. But I think the other side of it, which is more interesting to me, is how do you capture all this data and then communicate it out to distributors or people that you're trying to demonstrate there's value or traction here. So I don't think there is one. I don't think there is a platform which does that. But you also don't need to get too bogged down in the complexity of it. Even if you just can demonstrate on a one sheet, right? Give me the links. Give me the snapshot of the numbers. Show me how quickly you've grown. Give me a sense of that velocity, and I can go look at it myself, right? So there are two elements there. So on the functionality side of it, there are lots of tools, but on kind of capturing the data and being able to communicate it and demonstrate it, I wouldn't say there is a good solution. I don't know, maybe someone else in the audience knows.
I mean, it's hard with Facebook if you're trying to pull that data out because of all the privacy settings. Like, you used to be able to pull and create a spreadsheet of the list of followers, but you can't do that now because of all of the levers that have been clamped down. So it's really difficult to sort of make those big picture generalizations or even pull all that information into a spreadsheet from Facebook. There's a platform called Follower Wonk that's pretty good for analyzing your Twitter following, and it's also really great for doing competitive intelligence too, because you can actually run other people's so if you see someone, and we don't really have competitors in this space. Like, if I love stories about whales, I'm not going to watch one story and then never watch them again. So every competitor is actually a potential partner, a collaborator. So look at their following, see who's following them, and that's a great tool to do that. Facebook's hard. I mean, just even going into the analytics that they provide on, if it's a page, not your personal, you don't get that kind of data. But if you have a page for your movie on Facebook, Facebook Insights can give you some generalizations. You can break it down, see male to female, where they are, the age range of people. But yeah, Facebook makes it difficult. That's why I always, even though email feels old some days, if you can funnel them into mailing list, like get them to sign up for a mailing list and then provide value, because then you own that relationship. If you don't do that and you just leave them all on Facebook and Twitter, they change the rules every week, it feels like. So you don't own that relationship.
Two quick things about email lists. Number one is, at best, you can expect about a 1% conversion rate from your social media following.
Yeah.
And that has to do with the algorithms and the feed base for how content is delivered to your followers. From really targeted email lists, you can get 20 to 30% action taken, meaning crowdfunding, contribution, show up to a screening, follow, share, like, etc. That is why emails are way more valuable than followers. And I like to say that if the purpose of social media is just to bring people from the ether, right, into the center being where they take the actual action, your email list is the step in between, because that's when they agree to get a little bit more involved. Sign up and we'll give you this, right, because you have to give them a reason to sign up. And then you have to make it valuable for them, as you said, to be on the email list. Emails are storytelling tools also. They should be treated as a short, like with the intention of a short film that's just like a little easier to make. Because every time you send an email to your email list, those people who open it are deciding if they're going to open the next one. So when you said the word intentionality at the beginning, it's about your intentions around your social media feed. You have to apply that to every sort of concentric circle inward from the ether. Who do I intend to reach, right? And how do I intend to reach them? Now, by the way, cautionary tale. Preparing for success, almost harder than preparing for failure, right? There's way more work if it's going really well, is the truth. So, you have everybody in the ether, you have the people who are now following you on social media, which is a lot, and now you want to draw them the next layer in, which is to an email list. And actually, that will give you a sense of your conversion rate and the activation rate of that huge Facebook following. That will help you understand what effectively gets people to take action. So if you really start hammering your Facebook with like really cool stuff and really cool reasons to sign up for the email list, that's traction that you really need to know, which is how many people who follow your Facebook actually give a shit enough to take the next step. Because just clicking a like button, super easy, right? Then they just become sort of a consumer of your information. You need to know who are the actors in there.
Yeah, email is the old workhorse of the internet, and it's
Still
what
works.
we're checking all the time.
Folks, we are so out of time it hurts, but I have to say this.
We have a lot more to say.
Yeah, this is
We
the
couldn't
Wild
tell.
West. You get it's from this morning till now. We're in the Wild West. You have the ability to do anything you want. You are not hobbled by the traditional system at all, even though it still exists over your head while you're making the film. It's up to you not to find volume, but to find traction and velocity. Those are the two words I want you to take home with you and think about what you're going to do to engage with your audience. I want to thank Annelise and Emily and Ryan. This has taught me a lot because, quite honestly, my film's Facebook page looks like crap and I haven't touched it in months, so I'm gonna go home and get some work done.
Okay, but unlike the Wild West, rather than laying claim to your patch of land that nobody else can be on, the way that we win here is working together.
Yes.
So we've got to be more like the Indians than the settlers.
That's right. Everyone, thank you very much. Thank you.